devour feculence. To put that monosyllabically, it's not my fault.
Yes, Milchick, yes. Man, this scene gave me life. I know I'm not the only one who's fantasized about telling off a boss like Drummond over here. We've all had one. And the pressure to complete Lumon's work has intensified, revealing more about their vision of the mind versus body. Their blueprint to create a perfect little worker bee, an evolved human. But our characters ain't having it. They are pushing back, defying these expectations, and starting to reclaim their power and control. Because no matter how much Lumon tries to control the mind and the body, there's an underlying essence to life and existence that they can't control, that drives people. It's love. Let's break it down. Just a quick content warning, this video does discuss very sensitive topics, so please be advised. Okay guys, that egg scene, it just left me feeling kinda gross. But let's start with why eat eggs? Well, duh, like everything with Lumon and the Eagans, it's because of Kier.
You know he used to drink 3 raw eggs and milk each morning?
I've heard.
His favorite breakfast.
Now back in season 1, Irving reads from one of the Kier compliance handbooks, and we get a peek at additional passages. One in particular stands out. And my skin was prone to ample bruising as a remnant of the consumption and of the close biological relationship betwixt my mother and father. The Eagans are inbred, causing genetic weakness, and the eggs are an indicator of that. Throughout history, inbreeding was kind of common amongst royalty, believing in divine bloodlines that must stay pure. It's where Game of Thrones got their idea for the Targaryens. There's a rare blood disease that causes easy bruising and increased risk of death from illness or injury, like Kier experienced. It's called hemophilia, also known as the royal disease. It gets its namesake due to the prominence of the disease amongst European royals in the 19th and 20th centuries, believed to be a result of inbreeding. Now, eggs are packed with nutrients. They're literally designed to grow life, so naturally they're loaded with high-quality protein, vitamins, and minerals. And milk adds fat, calcium, and more protein, making this combo great for muscle growth, bone health, and yes, even blood clotting. It's a big reason eggs are so popular in the bodybuilding community. Just look at Gaston, that dude is ripped.
I was a lad, I ate 4 dozen eggs, I'm roughly the size of a pie.
Overall, inbreeding is known to increase the risk of genetic mutations and disease, which could also explain Helena's weak enamel.
Guys, this is Helly. She's 30 years old, she's allergic to almonds, and has weak enamel.
It also increases the chances of passing on recessive traits like the Eagan's blue eyes. I mean, technically blue eyes are a genetic mutation, even though they're often considered desirable. The painting The Youthful Convalescence of Kier depicts Kier Eagan as a sickly boy, illustrating his genetic weakness as a story of overcoming that adversity.
Let not weakness live in your veins.
I believe Kier's vision for founding Lumon boils down to one thing: creating the perfect human. He mastered his tempers to achieve the perfect mind, but the Eagan lineage is flawed. Their bodies are imperfect. Their work is twofold: the Severance chip to engineer a perfectly tamed mind, and I believe selective crossbreeding to create a perfect body, to eliminate the weakness in the Eagan's veins, creating a new version of humanity in Kier's image, from his blood, perfect, godlike beings.
It is this great and consecrated power that I hope to pass on to all of you, my children.
Kier's vision for the world is a form of eugenics, which is famously associated with Hitler and the Nazis, who used it to justify their belief in a superior, blonde-haired, blue-eyed race. The Nazis used horrific methods to try to create a perfect society, ignoring all moral boundaries. This is exactly what Lumon is doing. In Season 2, Episode 7, we learn about Lumon's involvement with the fertility clinic, and it reminds me of the Netflix documentary, Our Father, about Donald Klein, a real-life fertility doctor who used his own sperm without the consent of the mothers, fathering over 90 children. At Lumon, people often say their family and Kier's children. While that language is common in religious and corporate settings to build unity and establish patriarchy, Is James Eagan taking it too literally?
Come now, children of my industry, and know the children of my blood.
The workers are our family. I thought that meant I had a few 100,000 literal brothers and sisters scattered around the world.
She's one of James.
I think the women brought to the birthing cabins were selected based on genetic testing done at the fertility clinic, desirable genes to strengthen the Eagan bloodline. We don't really know yet the extent of consent and how these women became one of James, but it seems the show is hinting that he has been grooming them. For example, the whole Wintertide Fellowship thing. It was created by James Eagan, and he handpicked Cobel for it. And notice how there's only a school for girls?
Your bed will be moved from your parents' home to the Gunnell Eagan Empathy Center.
I didn't even get to say goodbye. Your studies were more important.
A common tactic of abusers, as well as in cults, is to isolate their victims and sever their familial bonds. We learn that both Cobel and Ms Huang experienced this, and the fact that the bed is mentioned just feels extra gross. It's horrific. The woman at the birthing cabins, even if they agreed, quote unquote, they were likely groomed, manipulated, or felt like they had no choice. Maybe even promised an end to infertility struggles. But the darkest part, they're severed. Like we've seen with Helly, Mark, Dylan, either the innie or the outie is usually not able to consent. It's beyond fucked. And maybe Lumon believes a severed mother will pass the innie traits to her child, a baby born with the ideal mind, just like Kier. In Ricken's book, The UUR, he brings up St Anselm, a Catholic archbishop from the 11th century who argued God must exist based on a logic paradox. It goes something like this. If God is the ultimate perfect being, then God must exist because perfection includes existence. Something that only exists in your imagination can't truly be perfect because being real is greater than being imagined.
Consider, if you will, St Anselm's ontological argument for the existence of God. The concept is explored further in the sundry works of Descartes, Leibniz, and Godel.
Now you've heard the saying, I think, therefore I am. It comes from the 17th century French philosopher René Descartes. Through the same logic as St Anselm, he popularized the idea of mind-body dualism. I have a clear and distinct idea of myself as a thinking, non-extended thing, and a clear and distinct idea of body as an extended and non-thinking thing. Whatever I can conceive clearly and distinctly, God can so create. Just as Anselm argued that God must exist because we can conceive of him, Descartes argued that mind and body must be distinct because we can conceive of them. Building on the ideas of Aristotle and Plato, Descartes viewed the mind like a soul, something that could exist independently. But this raised the mind-body problem. If they are truly separate, how the hell do they interact? Why does a mental state like sadness trigger a physical response like crying? Descartes' answer? The pineal gland. He believed this tiny structure located between the brain's hemispheres was the bridge between mind and body. Now, in my episode 6 breakdown, we talked about how the severance chip might work in the brain, and several of you brought up in the comments the pineal gland's possible role, and I think you guys are right. The pineal gland produces melatonin, which regulates sleep, and as we know, sleep is crucial for your body and mind to repair and recharge. Sleep impacts things like your disease susceptibility, healing, and even aging. Sleep has come up throughout the series, the importance of getting good sleep stressed by Cobel on multiple occasions.
She used to say it takes the saints 8 hours to bless a sleeping child. I hope you aren't rushing the saints.
Well, come by the shop, okay? I'll give you a mugwort bath bomb that'll make you sleep like a rag doll. Now, I'm experimenting with chamomile, so no hard feelings if you gag.
Now, if the severance chip controls the pineal gland, it controls sleep, and with it, the mind. As I mentioned in my episode 4 Ortbo video, certain brainwave states tied to sleep are ideal for brainwashing and hypnosis. MKUltra even experimented with sleep deprivation as a form of mind control in the 50s and 60s. Now, sleep regulation could even influence epigenetics, passing traits across generations. In my Chakai Bardo video, we talked about how conditioned fears in mice were passed down to their grandchildren, despite never experiencing the stimulus themselves. Ancient Greeks believed the pineal gland was the gateway for something they called pneuma, the fundamental essence that drives existence. You could think of it as a life force, even a soul or spirit. It tracks with the Severance chip. By controlling the gland, Lumon decides which soul to come through, the innie or the outie. Aristotle even believed pneuma resided in semen, meaning a parent's essence could be passed to their offspring. In a way, the same soul continues to live on. It's an early explanation for how non-physical traits like fears, instincts, and personality are inherited, like in the mice experiment. Now, going back to the quote about St Anselm in Ricken's book, it also references 17th century philosopher Gottfried Leibniz and 20th century mathematician and philosopher Burt Gödel. Leibniz saw God as the answer to the mind-body problem. He believed in monads, like life forces like pneuma, that exist in everything and are controlled by God to shape the universe. Gödel used math to back up Anselm's logic about God. He argues that if multiple possible worlds exist, there has to be a being great enough to exist in all of them. Now, all of these ideas about God, life, existence, they come together in the short story, The Egg, by Andy Weir. The story follows a man who dies in a car crash and is transported to an unearthly realm to speak with God. There he finds out he must live every human life that has ever existed or will ever exist. He is Hitler and all the Jewish people he harmed. He is Abraham Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth. The pain he inflicted was also inflicted upon himself, and the joy he brought was his own. God tells him that the universe is an egg, and he is a fetus growing in it. Once he's experienced all lives, he will be born as one of God's kind. The lives he experiences in the egg universe resemble monads, or pneuma. Each individual mind or soul is unique, separate, and part of a whole universe. Every past life influences the eventual life of the godchild that will be born, the being that exists in all worlds. The way Helena eats her egg is symbolic of this story and these theories. The characters on the plate represent two souls, the innie and the outie, sort of fighting for possession of the child or body. Helena splitting the egg represents all the different lives the child lives within the egg universe. This is what Lumon is doing with Gemma. She's a being that exists in all worlds. The testing floor is her egg. She is a fetus growing in Lumon's womb. When their chip is perfected and Cold Harbor is complete, a new kind of human will emerge, a being whose life force is controlled by God, or in this case by Kier, born in his image, his soul carrying on. If pneuma, life force, and monads are the building blocks of existence, what if the foundation itself is love? Like a law of the universe, love isn't just an emotion, but the force that holds everything together. Lumon can control what the soul lets in, suppress tempers, and manipulate minds. But if love is the core of reality, no amount of control can erase it. Without love, there's no existence. Now, despite the cold nature of the Eagans, James's evil ass does have some capacity for love. He has shown affection toward Helena, but interesting enough, the one time he actually seemed caring was when it was Helly during the OTC.
I cried in my bed when they told me what she tried to do to you.
But any trace of love that he might have for his daughter is drowned out by his evil plans. If the inbreeding theory is right, and God, I hope it's not, but if we're reading all the signs correctly about his disgusting grooming ass, then he needs her to perfect their bloodline. Like the woman at the birthing cabins, her severed mind must deliver James' baby.
You tricked me.
The way James says this is like he's talking to a child. Helena has been a disappointment to her father. She doesn't seem to fully live the Lumon values.
Fetid moppet.
My dad used to make me recite the 9 core principles before bed every night, which I can't say I always did happily. My dad would love for me to sit here and say that I'm taking this job out of loyalty. But I took a separate job because it sounds freaking awesome.
I wish you'd take them raw.
Helena eating hard-boiled eggs instead of raw is another way she rebels. It would seem her whole life she's been defiant, and she tricked her father into believing she's abandoned her childish folly and is ready to step up as the next CEO. But in reality, Severance is Helena's escape from suffering, just like everyone else. Her life is hell. Everything is controlled, including her own bodily autonomy. Now, I keep going back and forth on whether or not Helena is pregnant with Mark's kid, but if she is pregnant, then this is her way of foiling her father's plans, escaping her duty as an Eagan, a true act of rebellion. Now, Lumon also understands that love is an important human motivator, like with Dylan and Gretchen in the Visitations. And man, it's just like Burt and Irving all over again. Dylan's love for Gretchen is just so damn powerful.
Well, maybe love transcends severance.
The only thing that matters to any Dylan anymore is her, and he foolishly thinks that they could be together, make a happy life.
My life started when you came here. I made this for you. I can give you a life, please.
But realistically, what kind of life can he even give her? I have a feeling Audie Dylan's proposal to Gretchen was just as simple as his Innie's was. He's never had much, no real career, no hobbies that truly stuck. A long time ago, he probably made a similar promise, proposing with something sentimental like the finger trap, because it was all he had.
He reminds me of how you used to be.
And so it makes it both hard and easy for Gretchen to walk away, knowing Dylan was like this before too, but his Innie is too naive to realize how the stressors of life, work, kids, they change you. That in the end it will be the same.
And if we're so different from our Audis, then how come we couldn't tell when you were gone?
Innie Dylan is coming to terms with who he really is, why Gretchen won't choose him. His Audie has proven to not be a great partner and is kind of a jerk. The fact that Helly and Helena weren't so different is enough proof to him that he's an ass too and doesn't deserve Gretchen. And as I said before, love is the foundation of life. Without love, there's no existence, and Dylan feels exactly that way. So he submits a request to resign and effectively end his life. Now, when Gretchen comes clean to Audie Dylan about hooking up with his Innie, he's pissed. He feels betrayed and violated.
It didn't...
It didn't... What? It didn't...
I think Gretchen was going to say it didn't feel like cheating. It felt like the good old days with Dylan. But it presents an interesting question. Is it really cheating? Technology often moves faster than society can keep up, not fully grasping the moral, ethical, and legal implications. And companies take full advantage, doing questionable shit because they know they can get away with it. For example, Facebook in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where user data was harvested to create psychological profiles in an effort to influence presidential elections. Lumon too built profiles using private data from blood drives, fertility clinics, and mailer questionnaires. Then there's AI and deepfakes, like the 2019 case of Jodie from England. Her face was edited into explicit content without her consent. Even though it wasn't really her, it was still her identity, leaving her feeling completely violated, much like how Dylan and Helly feel about their likeness being used without control. Then there's CRISPR, a gene editing tool, hailed as a way to cure disease. But it's also a gateway to designer babies, engineered viruses, and other unknown risks to human DNA. Lumon's work to create the perfect human also comes with great risk. Severance was deployed before people could fully understand its impact. Dylan and Gretchen likely never even imagined that Dylan's Innie could become a homewrecker in their marriage. And moving on to Irving, we also get confirmation of what most of us suspected. Burt's Audie works for Lumon too, and the dinner with Burt was a setup.
Goodman may have participated as a low-level Lumon enforcer or goon.
Drummond uncovered evidence of Irving's investigation into Lumon and sent Burt to clean up the mess. Lumon seems to know that they can use Irving's feelings for Burt against him. But Burt, he isn't a good man, and any relationship with him would be toxic. Sometimes people ignore red flags out of love, doing mental gymnastics to avoid facing the truth about someone, even when it harms their well-being.
I've never been loved before. Not really.
Irving was a military dude, seemingly a loner, just a man and his dog. We don't really know the climate about homosexuality in their world, but if it's anything like the real world, I wouldn't be surprised if he felt suppressed in his sexuality, shamed, feeling like he needed to hide it. You know how toxic masculinity can be, especially in the military. Remember Don't Ask, Don't Tell from the Clinton era? Openly gay people were not allowed in the military. As long as you were closeted and kept it quiet, it was all good.
I'm just not ready. I'm sorry.
When he was an Innie, he wasn't ready yet to take the leap. And I also think it's reflective on how his Audie felt at the time about love and sexuality. But now that Audie Irving has met Burt and has these intense feelings, I think he has finally come to terms with who he is. Knowing that even his Innie has the same feelings, it solidifies for him that he was born this way. It's part of his nature, not something he can change or should suppress. Like we talked about before, love is the foundation of the soul and life.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
He's ready now to live authentically. These feelings for Burt he can't ignore. But unfortunately for Irving, like I said before, Burt is not a good man. Back in season 1, Burt says bon voyage in his retirement video.
Bon voyage.
To me, signifying the death of his innie, sending him off to sail into the sunset.
Bon voyage.
And here he says bon voyage again to Irving, I think also signaling Outie Irving sailing off to his metaphorical death, back into Lumon's hands. When Irving got on the train, I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting that shit to blow up, like another Dorner truck explosion incident. But it seems like Irving's fate might be even worse. As the train heads off into the distance, the scene transitions, looking as if the train is heading straight to the testing floor elevator. I think Burt did his job, and while his feelings may have been sincere, I have to reiterate, he is not a good man. Burt's position is reminiscent of the Nuremberg trials, held after World War II. It was the first major international tribunal, setting a precedent for prosecuting war crimes. They formally codified crimes against humanity and rejected the just following orders, sir defense, holding individuals accountable despite the chain of command. Many Nazi officials were sentenced to death for their roles in the Holocaust. I think Burt knows there's no excuse for what he's done. Participation in the system still makes him complicit in Lumon's crimes.
You asked me why I severed. I like the idea that I could be innocent. Again, part of me.
Burt hoped a part of him could stay untainted, a fresh soul absolved of guilt. But his defense doesn't hold up. He knew before Severance that Lumon was committing crimes against humanity, choosing to work for them. Memory or not, he's choosing to be complicit. Unlike others who were deceived, he went in knowing the truth. His innie isn't truly innocent. He has damned both versions of himself. Now, one thing I really hope is that we get more answers on who Irving was calling on the payphone. Who was he working with, and what exactly was he trying to expose? And where do you think the train is heading? Maybe it's to an area like the Ortbo or somewhere new we haven't seen yet. Now let's talk about my man Milchick. He was put through the ringer this episode. Ever since he took over the severed floor from Cobel, we've seen him struggle with commanding any authority or respect. In his office, Milchick sits beneath a small painting of an iceberg, while Cobel's office featured a large storm painting, both reflecting their personalities. Cobel is the storm, forceful, relentless, bending things to her will. Milchick, on the other hand, well, we're just seeing the tip of his iceberg. What we see of him at Lumon is just the surface, his work persona. This aligns with Freud's iceberg model of the mind. The id, deep below the surface, represents primal instincts and desires, your true nature. The ego, that's visible on the top, is sort of like a mediator between your instincts and external reality. And the superego governs morality and internalized rules. The iceberg metaphor suggests that much of who Milchick is remains hidden. What we see, the professional, obedient company man, is just his conscious, his ego, controlled self. Below the surface is his id, are his suppressed emotions and true identity, forced into repression by Lumon. But throughout the episode, people keep chipping away at his iceberg, his true self becoming harder to repress. On the surface, Milchick doesn't seem to have much of a backbone. He's lost any respect he had when Cobel was in charge, and he's sort of fumbling around to find his way as a leader at Lumon. First in comes Helly, who comes barging into his office and talks down to him.
This behavior constitutes insubordination.
Yeah, no shit.
And then Dylan with his resignation request as he disrespectfully throws his badge at Milchick's desk. And then on top of the Kier paintings and the bullshit feedback he's received about using big words and paper clips, Drummond piles right on, belittling Milchick. As the saying goes, the shit rolls downhill. Just like in real life when your boss gets pressured and takes it out on you, Milchick ends up blamed for things that aren't even his responsibility. He's been worn down, his iceberg exposed, and beneath that submissive, don't rock the boat attitude, there's a spark of resistance in him.
Devour feculence. Eat shit, Mr. Drummond.
It's fucked up. To Lumon, he'll never be considered one of them, of pure Kier bloodline. Everyone, even his subordinates, see him as lesser.
Kind of like you and Cobel. Replace one part with another.
Helly tells it like it is. Ultimately, to Lumon, he's easily replaceable. Nothing. And so, when he gets that phone call from Mark, he looks up at his iceberg picture and it hits him.
Isn't that what Lumon's all about?
Balance?
I mean, work is just work, right?
Working at Lumon has consumed his life, becoming more than just a job. It's his entire identity. But as he starts to reflect, he realizes his Lumon persona is just the surface, the tip of his iceberg. His reaction to Drummond and his growing awareness of his own identity as a Black, educated man highlight that there's more to him than just work. It reinforces the idea that work is only one part of who he is, and he's beginning to understand the importance of reclaiming his sense of self beyond Lumon. Y'all, after episode 5, I had hopes Milchick would switch sides, and after the last few episodes, it seemed like he was instead gonna go harder down that Lumon path. But this episode sells it for me. He's gonna flip and help Mark. But one thing we haven't really seen from Milchick yet is love. I hope to see more about his background and motivations, and like we said before, love is the foundation to the soul, to life. There must be some love within his iceberg somewhere. Okay, and let's talk about that calling out sick scene. That shit was so real. I know y'all have had that feeling before, scared to call in sick, trying to come up with a believable lie so you don't get in trouble. It makes you feel like a child hiding something from your parents. It's kind of humiliating. And these companies, they pry into your personal life, expecting details on why you aren't there and what you're doing in your absence. But Milchick said it himself. His authority only covers what happens on the severed floor. Outside of that, it's none of his damn business. So after Mark calls out sick at Cobel's direction, he reluctantly goes along with her and Devon's plan, even though he doesn't trust her. And rightfully so. She seems to only use people for her own purposes, whether it's under Lumon's influence or not. She manipulates them by giving them just enough info to create urgency and make them feel like they have no choice but to trust her, much like how Lumon works.
Cold Harbor. And if you've completed it, she's already dead.
Cobel often speaks in riddles and metaphor, and honestly, I don't think she meant Gemma would be physically dead. I think she means the Gemma Mark knows will be dead. Her mind will be evolved to Kier's image. But this is enough to get Mark and Devon to feel cornered and forced to listen to her.
Miss Marshall White, 9th floor.
Specialties department.
I'm looking for a gold symbol.
When they get to the birthing cabins, the passcode Cobel uses references the Twilight Zone episode, The Afterhours. You know, like the title of this episode. In The Afterhours, mannequins at a department store get to come alive for 1 month at a time before they have to return to the 9th floor storage room. This could be a reference that the women at the cabins are only severed for a month at a time to have their babies. It also is the setting for what happens in this episode, like Helly seeing James after hours on the severed floor, Mark and Cobel sneaking into the cabins after hours, and Milchick telling Drummond that Mark ain't his problem after hours. Once they get into the birthing cabin, we see an iconic image of Cobel standing front and center in a dark, fiery room, alluding to evil, perhaps like the imagery we saw of Burt at his house in front of his fire. Is Cobel another devil in disguise? Are they about to make another deal with the devil? Now let's not forget the light fixture above her head. It looks a lot like a beehive, symbolic of the analogy in Ricken's book about bees. The worker bee is the most important part of a society, and here at James' cabin is where the perfect little worker bees are birthed, just like in a beehive. But also, when Dylan activated the OTC in season 1, we saw a control labeled as, yes, you guessed it, Beehive. Is that control linked to the birthing cabins? Are we going to find out exactly what Beehive is? And lastly, we have a couple more things to cover with Ms Huang. We're told she's being sent off to Svalbard for the Wintertide Fellowship. And the interesting thing about Svalbard is that it's an extremely remote Arctic island and home of company towns, like we talked about in the last episode with Saltsneck. Originally discovered by whalers, it became home to mining and research settlements from different countries around the world. The Arctic World Archive is located there. It's a massive offline data storage or cold storage made up of important data about our world and society. This is built to last up to 2,000 years in the right conditions, hence why it's buried in the Arctic on Svalbard. In addition, there's the Global Seed Vault there, a backup for crops in the event of something catastrophic happening. There's so much different research conducted on Svalbard, so it's pretty interesting that Lumon is sending Ms Huang there. What kind of research is Lumon doing? Are they storing human DNA? Is there cold storage or cold harbor there? And then there's the whole destroying of Ms Huang's ring toss game.
The book requires that you mark this betterment with a material sacrifice. I have chosen your ring toss game as a proper totem.
In Ricken's book, The You Are, he talks about totems, symbols of personal identity, things that define who you are, that are meant to be placed on a vanity mirror, a representation of individuality. But Lumon, as we've seen before with the Dieter story that mirrors Ricken's own upbringing, they take this concept and distort it. Instead of embracing the totems as a symbol of identity, Lumon pushes the idea that they must be destroyed when you accept Kier's path. The destruction of Ms Huang's ring toss game is a symbolic act of forcing her to let go of her individuality and submit to the collective, to Kier's vision. Okay, I know I always say this, but damn, this show just keeps getting better and better. This episode was so packed with layers of meaning and symbolism. I've done enough yapping though. I want to hear what y'all think about all this. Do you think Cobel's actually going to betray Lumon and help Mark? Do you think Burt is sending Irving back off to Lumon or letting him go? Will Dylan actually quit and kill his innie off? And what the hell is James up to? We are in for a treat next episode. Make sure you leave a comment below letting me know your thoughts. As always, if you liked this video, please consider hitting the like button and be sure to subscribe for more breakdowns. Special shout out to my channel member. You too can get a member shout out by hitting that join button today. Your support keeps this channel going. Until next time, toodles.